Artificial intelligence, or AI, has become the most important technological revolution of our lifetime. And this isn't just because chatbots or automation or trillion-dollar companies, but because I would say intelligence itself has turned into infrastructure, into economy, or into power. And somewhere inside of that possibility, there's a project called Bittensor. And this is the Tao Thesis. Most of these crypto projects, they want you to believe that they're building the future, but Tao is asking a much bigger question than that. And the question is, what if intelligence itself becomes a market, or a world where machine models compete, where contributors are rewarded, and where useful intelligence has some sort of economic value, and where the token connected to that system becomes one of the most important assets in crypto. At least that's the vision here. The dream behind Bittensor. So Bittensor's dream is quite simple, and it's kind of radical. It's to turn machine intelligence into an open marketplace. So this way, anyone can contribute models, data, or compute, and usefulness gets measured, and then value gets rewarded. Over time, the best intelligence rises, and weak outputs get filtered out, and the network compounds. So in that world, Tao isn't just a ticker; it's the coordination layer, the economic heartbeat of a global, permissionless market for intelligence. But the Tao story splits into two completely different realities. The bulls believe, Tao could become the Bitcoin of decentralized AI, a scarce digital asset connected directly to some machine intelligence. But the bears ask some uncomfortable questions. Where is the real revenue? Is demand actually growing faster than emissions? Is the network, truly decentralized? Or is the market simply pricing in a future that, hasn't even arrived yet? And that tension is what makes Tao, I think, in my own opinion, one of the most controversial projects in crypto. So what exactly is Tao for, everyone here is new and watching this? So Tao is the native token behind Bittensor. It's a decentralized network, built around artificial intelligence. And instead of one company controlling the entire AI stack that's out there, participants contribute models and compute and data and services. The network then rewards contributors based on usefulness, at least in theory here. And if Bittensor succeeds, well, Tao becomes much more than just any other crypto token. It becomes the economic layer, we'll say, underneath decentralized machine intelligence. Tao sits directly at the intersection of three massive narratives. So these massive narratives are artificial intelligence, crypto scarcity, and institutional adoption. AI may become, one of the largest technological shifts in modern history as we know it. Crypto introduced digitally scarce assets, and institutions are increasingly searching for exposure to both of these. The bulls believe, Tao combines all three, and that combination is exactly why today, the market is paying attention. But underneath all the narratives, one question matters more than I'd say everything else. Can Bittensor become important enough that Tao actually deserves to be valuable here? Because that is the main difference between a trade or a thesis. And over the next few sections, that's exactly what we're going to explore here. So stay tuned in. The bullish argument for Tao begins with a very simple idea, or simple to most, but decentralized AI may eventually require some sort of decentralized infrastructure. And if that happens, well, Bittensor could become, let's say, one of the most important crypto native AI networks in existence. The bull case here can almost be summarized into one sentence. Tao wins if decentralized AI becomes a major infrastructure layer, and Bittensor becomes the economic network that's underneath it. The market is not only betting on what Bittensor is today, it's betting on what it could eventually or potentially become. And in speculative markets, future potential often moves faster than the present reality that we live in right now. Today, the most powerful AI systems in the world are controlled by a very small number of organizations. The largest models, the best compute, the best researchers, the distribution, the capital, all concentrated. So Bittensor's argument is that intelligence is way too important to remain controlled by only, a handful of centralized companies. The vision of them is an open marketplace for intelligence. It's permissionless, competitive, and global. In every gold rush, the biggest fortunes are not always made by, digging for gold. Sometimes they're made by selling the tools for the diggers to utilize. The bullish argument says Bittensor could become, infrastructure underneath the AI boom itself. Not just some merely, another application, but part of the economic foundation powering decentralized machine intelligence. And if that happens, Tao becomes directly connected to the expansion of the entire ecosystem. Scarcity definitely changes how markets think, and Bitcoin has proved that, multiple times. And Tao has a maximum supply of 21 million tokens, a structure, intentionally designed to trigger comparisons to digital scarcity. But Tao is different. It attempts to connect scarcity not just to money, but to machine intelligence itself. And if demand continues rising, while, issuance continues falling, well, the reflexive upside becomes powerful. But for the bullish thesis to actually work here, several things need to happen first. Firstly, some real growth, not just more generic subnets, but useful subnets, real developers, some real contribution quality. Secondly, durable usage, economic activity that exists, beyond speculation or token emissions. And third, and lastly, institutional attention. ETF filings, custody solutions, research coverage, expansion of the wide buyer base that's out there. Because eventually, narratives require some type of solid evidence, some backing, or some proof that it can build its foundation on to be, trustworthy and reliable. This is where, reflexivity enters the picture. Price rises, attention rises, liquidity rises, and developers and institutions begin paying attention, and suddenly the network starts compounding on itself. That's when Tao potentially stops trading like a speculative narrative token. It starts trading more like infrastructure. And if that transition ever happens, the upside becomes, asymmetric very quickly, and in layman terms, or the common tongue, basically Tao explodes at that point. But this is where the story becomes, very dangerous, because the bearish argument against Tao is also incredibly strong. The core bear thesis is pretty simple. So Tao's valuation may be growing much faster than the actual economics underneath the entire network. So critics ask difficult questions such as how much real demand currently exists, or how much actual revenue is being generated, or how much activity is organic and how much is simply driven by token incentives. Because eventually, markets stop caring about this whole possibility alone type deal, and they start demanding, cold hard truth or cold hard evidence. Right now, the network distributes large amounts of Tao rewards, and bears argue that many participants are contributing, yes, because the protocol is paying them to participate. It's not necessarily because outside customers are demanding these services at scale, and that distinction matters a lot, actually, because incentive-driven growth and sustainable economic demand are not always, one and the same thing. But scarcity alone, it's never enough, because markets love scarcity during especially euphoric periods. But when the sentiment cools, fundamentals suddenly start mattering again. A scarce asset can still collapse, especially if confidence disappears. And crypto history is filled with projects like this that had powerful narratives but failed to build durable economic systems underneath them. And Bittensor is not only competing against crypto projects, it's competing against trillion dollar technology companies, centralized AI infrastructure giants, open source AI communities, and some of the most well-funded organizations on this earth. Companies with enormous compute advantages, massive research teams working for them, global distribution, unlimited capital access, billions of dollars, which raises another difficult question. And can decentralized systems realistically compete against centralized giants moving at such a big global scale? The bear scenario is not impossible. In that version of the future, Tao becomes a powerful narrative asset, but it never fully evolves into sustainable infrastructure. A speculative cycle, a strong trade, but not a lasting foundation for decentralized AI. And if that happens, valuations, expectations may eventually collide with the reality. And this is what makes Tao so fascinating, because both sides of the argument, they sound believable. The upside feels enormous. The risks feel, in my opinion, definitely real, and they're definitely there. And somewhere between optimism and skepticism, the market continues trying to price the future for where we're headed. High upside assets almost always come attached to equally violent risks, and Tao is no exception for this. And volatility can be extreme, liquidity can disappear quickly, drawdowns can definitely happen, and even if the long-term thesis remains intact, that psychological pressure alone eliminates most participants in this long before the story fully gets to play out. Then there's valuation risk. Sometimes a project improves while the asset still falls because expectations were already way too high. In speculative markets, price often moves ahead of reality. And when expectations become excessive, even good developments may not even be enough. There are also some structural risks, token economics, governance concerns, centralization debates, regulatory uncertainty, security vulnerabilities, reputation shocks. Emerging networks are built partly on code and partly on trust. But, everyone here knows trust breaks faster than most people expect. It doesn't take a lot to do that. Another major risk is complexity. Most investors still struggle to fully explain how Bittensor actually works. And in markets, complexity can become dangerous because narratives spread faster than understanding, kind of like wildfire, which means participants may be buying exposure to something that they don't even really grasp or completely understand. Then comes the controversy. Some critics believe the market is becoming too emotionally attached to AI narrative itself. And let's be real here, it really is. That investors are projecting, enormous future assumptions onto projects long before sustainable economics even exist. Others argue that, early infrastructure always looks speculative, which they're not wrong, but before adoption finally catches up, and historically, both arguments have been correct at different times. This creates an unusual, market dynamic because Tao is trading partly on current adoption, future expectations, and technological ambition, and, collective belief, which means price discovery becomes deeply psychological. And psychology, we all know, can move markets much, much faster than the basic fundamentals. So the reality is, Nobody truly knows how decentralized AI evolves from here. Not the bulls, not the bears, not institutions, not retail, which is exactly why volatility remains so extreme. The market is attempting to price uncertainty, we'll say, itself. And yet, despite all the risks, the narrative continues growing. Developers continue building, institutions continue watching, and the market continues asking the same question. What if decentralized AI actually works? What makes Tao interesting is that this story didn't just appear overnight. Artificial intelligence has been developing for decades now. Crypto introduced digital scarcity, and now those two worlds are beginning to collide. Tao exists directly at the center of that intersection, basically. So the next few years will likely determine whether decentralized AI becomes, a genuine infrastructure movement or simply just another speculative cycle. And that distinction matters enormously, actually, because infrastructure creates durability. Narrative alone does not. If adoption does accelerate, well, Tao could potentially benefit from multiple, simultaneous forces: AI expansion, scarcity dynamics, institutional exposure, increased developer participation, and just broader market attention. That combination alone is what creates this asymmetric opportunity. But I say, if growth slows or decentralized AI struggles to even compete, the downside can also become, very severe, because speculative markets move aggressively in both directions, especially when expectations become emotionally charged. And this is where long-term conviction really becomes difficult, because volatility tests psychology, not just, analysis. The hardest part of investing is rarely understanding the thesis. It's surviving the uncertainty long enough to see whether the thesis really actually plays out. Markets are ultimately driven by two forces: narrative, one, and reality, two. Some narratives create reality, but sometimes reality destroys narratives, and over time, the market will decide which one will survive. The bulls believe Tao could become foundational infrastructure for decentralized intelligence. The bears believe valuation has moved, way too far ahead of proof. And both arguments contain truth, which is exactly why the market still remains, divided. Because beneath every major market opportunity, it definitely, sits uncertainty. And that uncertainty creates fear, speculation, volatility. But occasionally, and if we're lucky for whoever's invested, it also creates transformation. The internet once looked speculative. Bitcoin once looked absurd. It was this crazy token that, I even went through it. I don't want to invest in Bitcoin. What the hell is that? And artificial intelligence once looked like it was impossible. It's like something we'd see in the movies. Well, history tends to reward people who can separate the temporary noise, we'll call it noise, from long-term structural change. But history also punishes blind optimism. It's not every revolutionary idea that's out there will succeed. Not every narrative survives. And not every ambitious project becomes infrastructure, which is why balanced analysis really does matter. especially in emerging markets, moving as quickly as they are right now. So the real question isn't whether Tao will experience volatility, because it will, 100%, it absolutely will. The real question is whether decentralized AI becomes important enough that networks like Bittensor eventually become necessary. Because if that happens, the implications now become enormous, not just for crypto, but for the future of intelligence itself, I'd say. Is Bittensor building the foundation for decentralized AI? Or is the market simply pricing today for a future that, may never even fully arrive? That is the Tao Thesis. And over the next decade, the market will decide whether this becomes one of the most important infrastructure stories in crypto, or one of the most ambitious speculative experiments of the AI era as we know. Either way, the race for intelligence has already begun. Stay locked in.